Sheriff Carl Hashwin lived alone about a mile from the station. He had never really found a woman to compete with his work, and after a series of quickly ended relationships, he eventually decided that being alone wasn't so bad. He had a daughter with one of them, a daughter he saw on holidays and sometimes during the summer, but other than that, he lived simply. So when his phone rang just after sunset, he was just finishing up his dinner and thinking about bed. Tomorrow was Halloween, and it was going to be a very long day. "Sheriff Hashwin," he said, not bothering to look at the number. It could only be a few different people, and all of them would be from the department. "Sheriff?" Molly said, and he could hear the fear in her voice. "Something's going on. I can't get in touch with Dreyfus or Gage. I tried to call Parks and Gibbs to see if they had any other way to get up with them, but I can't seem to get them either. I don't really know what to do here, and neither of them have checked in for about 2 hours. Carl was already getting his uniform on. He had left it laid across the chair in the bedroom. Not much sense in wearing a new one when he didn't do anything but sit in his office and field questions these days. Carl missed writing a route sometimes, missed feeling useful. He knew that he could get more done as the sheriff, but often it felt like the politics of the job held him back from doing anything meaningful. He slid his gun into his holster and grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door. "I'll be right there, Molly," he said. It was going to be a long night, too, it would appear. Darrell Stutter was leaning against the door of his barn, Garvey Munchell leaning on the other side of the barn door as he smoked one of those shitty home-rolled cigarettes he liked. Stutter had the biggest barn amongst the four of them, and it had been decided that the remainder of the pumpkins would go into it until the trucks came tomorrow. The order for the processing plant would be a group effort this year, and it wouldn't leave them a lot of profit margins. "Garvey," Darrell finally said, his eyes starting to try to droop along with the sun, "roll me one of those darts, could you?" Garvey smirked around the coal. "Thought you gave 'em up last year." "I did, but if I have to sit here dozing and smelling you inhaling 'em, then I'm gonna need something to chase it off with." The farmer's wind-burnt face crinkled a little as he stepped over to his production rival and handed him one of the cigarettes. They were flimsy-looking things, made of cheap rolling papers, but the tobacco inside was rich and smooth. He suspected that Garvey had grown it himself, and suddenly he wondered if he sold it too. Darrell might pick it back up if he could drag a lungful of this in every evening. "Much obliged," he said, as Garvey put his lighter away. "Welcome. You think they'll come tonight?" Garvey asked, turning back to look at the field. Darrell shrugged. "I guess it'll have to be tonight if they do. This has progressed well past Halloween pranks, and I'm worried that it's personal this year." Garvey said nothing, but it was pretty clear that he'd come to the same conclusion. Garvey and Feynman had been just as hard hit as Stutter, but Stutter had more to lose, the way he saw it at least. He had twice as much land as they did, and his output was always higher because of it. The sheriff had promised to send aid, to protect their interests, but no help had come. Stutter had taken something else from the conversation, too. There had been a time when the farms had taken care of each other, had banded together instead of turning to the law, and that time had come again. If they could hold out till tomorrow, till the last produce truck came rolling in, they could all start again next year and hope for less helling than the year before. They had 40-odd hands out there, Feynman standing by with his rifle on top of the barn, and they would hold out against whatever might come. If it was kids, then they were going to give them a scare. If it were adults, maybe those bastards that had approached him a few years ago to buy him out for whatever growing co-op they were cooking up this time, well, it might just come to bloodshed then. Either way, tonight would be the end of this nonsense, so they could get back to work. As the sun set, stretching its black fingers across the land, Stutter loosed another yawn. It was going to be a long night. He wondered again why Camlin hadn't decided to stand with them. He had a pretty big plot too, though it was smaller than Darrell's or Garvey's, and he must have suffered losses. He had come to see him and found him out in the field tilling and planting for some reason. It was nearing November. There'd be no time for harvest again. He told him as much, but Camlin had ignored him. Daryl had looked around while he was there, seeming to feel an absence, but he couldn't place it. Camlin was too in his own delusions at this point to help them, and Daryl supposed it was better than wallowing in his wife's death. "You smell something?" Garvey asked, and Stutter shook himself awake as he realized that 2 hours had passed between blinks. "Just the smoldering pile of butts you've left around your boots." "Nah, something else," Garvey said, and that was when Stutter noticed the slight spark in the distance. He stood up straighter, seeing the beginnings of the blaze as it took hold. It was miles away, maybe the next farm over, and it looked like someone had set fire to Garvey's cornfield. The dry fuel was going up in great swatches, and a fire lit the night as Garvey began to tremble. "Too far. This is too far. I'm all for a little Halloween Helen, but this is too much. I'll kill him. I'll kill the little bastard's dead," he shouted, making a wobbly run for his land before Stutter grabbed him. Garvey looked back at him like he wanted to slap him, but he must have seen something in the older farmer's eyes. Stutter wanted to let him go, to go with him in fact, but he knew that that was what they wanted. That was a honeypot, and Stutter didn't mean to see anyone get stuck in it. "It's a trap, Garvey. Don't fall for it. It's just dry stalks. All the corn's in here. Little Tara's did you a favor, in fact. Now it'll be easier to plow it flat." Garvey tried to tug away, but Daryl held him fast. "Don't be a fool. What matters is here. Here's where we make our stand." Some of the hands had noticed it too, and they were coming to stand around the front of the barn as they gawked at the burning field of corn husks. "Get ready, boys. The rabble's coming to take what's ours, and I don't mean to stand by and let 'em have it." Sheriff Carl walked into the station to find Molly with a phone on each ear and the switchboard on her desk lit up. She looked up hopefully, glad to have some backup, and she told the caller to hold as she put the phones down. She looked frazzled, like she'd been pulling at her short blonde hair, and her mascara looked runny like she might have been crying. "Thank God! I didn't know what to do, Sheriff. The calls have been coming in for hours. Where have you been? I called you before sunset." Sheriff Carl took a seat beside her, looking over some of the notes that she had taken. "Sorry, darling. I was hoping to find my missing deputies at Fuller's with their radios off, or maybe broken down somewhere. I drove around for a bit looking for 'em, but so far I've found nothing, not hide nor hair of 'em." Molly nodded, but she still looked miffed. "Well, I could have really used you here. The calls from the farmland have been coming in since sunset. I've got reports of a fire at the Munchell place, weird sightings of people on the road, and several houses calling about prowlers." "Have you heard back from any of the callers with the prowlers?" "Nope. And I've tried calling more than a few of them back. I don't know what's going on, and I'm stuck here with no one to report back." As the phone began to ring again, Molly picked it up in a huff and asked the caller how she could help them. "Yes, ma'am, I'm aware of the fire at the Munchell Ranch. Yes, ma'am, I know. There's something going on at the Stutter farm, too." Molly was quiet for a few seconds as she listened. "A fight? Do you know who's involved?" "Men in masks. Yes, ma'am. I'll have a unit out there as soon as I'm able." She hung up and looked at Carl, shrugging as she silently asked him what to do. "Call Sully and Mikowski. Get them down here right away. Tell them it's an emergency and we need them here ASAP. I'll go down to the Stutter farm and see what's going on." He dug his keys out as he walked over to the weapons cage where they kept the shotguns. "And what happens when something happens to you and I'm stuck here by myself?" Molly asked, a little angrier than she meant to. Carl loaded one of the shotguns and, after considering it for a minute, brought it to the desk with a box of shells. "You know how to use one of these, I trust." Molly scoffed. "Of course, Sheriff. If things go sideways, use it to defend yourself. If I don't check in after an hour, lock the doors and don't open them for anyone but Sully or Clarence." He took another shotgun down and loaded it, stuffing a handful of shells into his pocket before turning to go. "I'll call you when I know something," he said, leaving before she could raise too much of a fuss. He could sense something building, a pressure more dire than any storm, and he hoped that he could stop it before it covered the whole town in a downpour of trouble. They were coming from the fields that surrounded the barn, their bodies cutting small runners against the corn or the wheat. Stutter wasn't sure who they were or what they meant to do, but as he clutched at the stock of his shotgun, he knew that he hadn't brought enough bullets to handle them. Garvey had a pitchfork from the barn, his pistol shoved into the front of his jeans like a bandit's blunderbuss. Most of the farmhands had implements from the barn as well, pitchforks and rakes and various other things. A few of them were armed with handguns as well, though. They were ready, or so they thought, to scare a bunch of kids back to town, but they couldn't have guessed what they would find coming out of the fields when the stalks parted. The hellions were wearing masks, weird sackcloth things that reminded Stutter of scarecrows, and he saw a few of the farmhands step back in confusion. They were armed with knives, most of them likely having come from someone's kitchen block, and they came into the space between the field and the barn with herky-jerky movements, like marionettes. They were unsettling to look at, and Stutter could already tell that most of them were not children. Far from it. The majority of them looked like high school may have been a few years beyond them, and that only solidified Stutter's ideas that this was an attempt to take his land. When Stutter fired his gun into the air, he had hoped to get a reaction out of them, but they never even flinched. "You're trespassing on my land. You have till a count of 10 to turn around and take your asses back the way you came. 1, he started, as he cocked his shotgun and slid a fresh shell into the tube. 2, 3, but as he raised the gun, he realized he would never make it to 4. They were charging in, 10, 20, 30 of them, and they were howling for blood. He fired once, dropping a hooded figure, but the second shot went high as someone slapped the gun away and pushed a knife into his guts. Stutter felt surprise fill him, even as the blood filled the wound in his stomach. They had never intended to scare him. This was murder, a coup, and he fell into the mud as he saw others being cut down as well. They were quick, these scarecrows, and as the farmhands broke and ran, he saw Garvey swing his pitchfork at a couple of them who danced out of the way. He pulled his gun out, attempting to shoot down a third as it charged at him, but his shot went wide as something stabbed him in the back. He went down, a dozen of them falling on him as they cut him to ribbons, and Darrell got a good look at his terrified face as a sudden brightness burst to life. He rolled painfully onto his back as the barn burst into flames with a whoosh of ignited fuel. The plan had never been theft, he realized too late. The plan had always been destruction, and as he lay there bleeding, with the bright new fire scorching fiery lights into his corneas, he saw a shadow fall across him. The horse's hooves made muddy thumps on the ground, and Darrell rolled over to see a rider as he towered over him. The man looked like a knight, but not the sort from King Arthur stories. This one looked like a haunted suit of armor, and before him on the saddle rode a kid with a pumpkin head. Darrell didn't know what was happening, and what happened next was as close to a mercy as he would receive from this one. Darrell's vision was getting soupy, and when the horse's hoof came down on his head, it was almost a blessing. Darrell died on the land he had tilled since he was a boy, but his water would nourish no crops that night. Travis groaned as he tried to sit up, his hands falling to his ribs as he looked around. He was lying on a cot in someone's basement. His uniform was laying across a chair in the corner, and someone had tried their best to get the bloodstains out of it. Whatever had patched him up had done a great job. They had cleaned and stitched the wound across his stomach, but Travis's question was why. The last thing he remembered seeing was someone with a pumpkin head. A couple of pumpkin heads, in fact, and if that was the case, then they had to be in league with the one on the dais. Didn't they? A light at the head of the stairs drew his attention, and as the stairs creaked, Travis braced himself for what was to come. It was the moment of truth now. Which would it be? The lady or the tiger? It was neither, as it turned out. Just a man with a tray of food and a fresh pumpkin on his head.
"Oh, good. You're awake,"
he said, his voice a little echoey through the pumpkin's carved mouth.
"Margaret was pretty sure you'd be fine. Are you hungry? My wife makes a mean grilled cheese."
He set the tray down across Travis's lap, and sure enough, there was a grilled cheese sandwich, a bowl of soup, and a can of ginger ale. Travis watched the guy distrustfully as he sat down at the foot of the bed, but the smell of soup was a little too much to resist. He had eaten half the sandwich, dipping it into the steaming soup, before he dared to ask his questions. "Did you and your son save me in the woods?"
"Daughter, actually, but yes, we did. We've been keeping an eye on the growing flock that's been springing up, and when we saw you escape, we knew that we had to help you."
"Why is that?" Travis husked, his voice cracking a little as he grabbed for the pop.
"Why? Well, golly, why not? You'd be dead if we hadn't."
"Yeah, but why help them at all? Isn't that gonna get you in trouble with your flock?" The pumpkin head shook in negation.
"It would be, if we were part of it, but we aren't."
"Could have fooled me," Travis said, as the ginger ale cooled his throat a little.
"Well, looks can be deceiving. The pumpkin boy's been tricked into doing what he's doing, tricked by the one that forces us to wear these pumpkin heads."
"Who?" Travis asked, but before the fella could answer, Travis thought he understood. "You mean the Green Man?"
"The Green Man, yes,"
the man said, a guy that Travis was already beginning to think of as Pa Pumpkin. Why would he force you to wear pumpkin heads if you aren't part of his cult?
"Oh, the pumpkins aren't of him. The Green Man hates pumpkins, in fact, but he also fears them."
I don't understand," Travis said, his head feeling a little woozy, though the soup was helping a bit. Pa Pumpkin turned his carved head back towards Travis.
"It's a long story. The short version is that we wear them to keep us safe. Otherwise, he'd find us and extract the debt that he swore to take."
"Debt?" Travis said, all of this making very little sense. His head felt heavy, and he was getting a little dizzy, probably the blood loss, he assumed. He lay back, the soup only about half gone, and watched the shimmer on the ceiling as he tried to make his head stop spinning.
"Yes, he considers our lives his to take. He's a greedy old thing. He's followed us to more than one town, but we always manage to hide from him."
"So, is he here for you, or—" Travis couldn't make it make sense, though.
"Who knows? This is just what he does. He can't come into our world without sacrifice. At least, that's what we were told. He needs to be invited, but there's always someone to manipulate to get him here. Usually it's children, I think. He gives them what they want the most, and in return, they help him come into the world."
Travis tried to sit up, tried to get his bearings about him, but it was hopeless. He just couldn't make the room stop spinning. He teetered, in danger of falling out of bed, and when Pa Pumpkin reached out to stop him from falling, Travis was very grateful.
"Whoa, easy there, champ. You aren't quite ready to rejoin society yet. Get some rest. I'll pop back in a little later and see how you're feeling."
Travis tried to protest, but as he lay back and attempted to muster his strength, he felt himself slipping back into a nearly comatose state. "Yes, ma'am, I heard you the first time. The sheriff is aware of the fire and doing everything he can to ensure public safety. Yes, ma'am, injured people at the Stutter Farm. I've contacted EMS to send them to the scene. I heard you. Yes, sir. I know there are people on the road. I have officers going to check into it right now." The phone kept ringing, but Molly finally threw it down and growled loudly. It had been a really shitty night so far, and she was kind of over it. "Anything we can do to help, Molly?" Sully asked for about the 1,000th time. He and Clarence had arrived about an hour ago, and were completely perplexed by what was going on. Sully was in full uniform, never one to go looking slouchy to a job, but Clarence had thrown on jeans and an old sheriff's department undershirt before coming in. He had gotten here before Sully, but he definitely didn't inspire much confidence. Both were here, however, and That made her feel a little better. "Nothing comes to mind, Sully. You guys just sit there till the sheriff," but as if summoned by the thought of him, the door burst open, and in walked Sheriff Carl. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. "Sully, Clarence, get those guns out of the cabinet and come with me. Molly, either hide or come with us, but either way, take that shotgun with you. I need you to call up the volunteer firefighters and the EMS crew ASAP and send them to way ahead of you, Sheriff, but it's no good. No one answers at either center, and I still can't raise anyone from the other offices. I'm afraid that this is all the help we're going to get." Sheriff Carl didn't seem to like that, but he pushed it aside. "Very well. 4 is better than none. Come on, boys, it's time to earn those checks." "What's going on, Sheriff?" Sully asked, feeding rounds into his weapon as he tucked the rest into his pocket. "There's a mob of hellions on the way into town, the same mob that set fire to the Stutter farm. We need to suppress them before they can wreck up the town, which seems to be their intent if the houses on the way are any indication." The two officers stopped mid-load, looking at Carl with real unease. "How many of them are we talking?" Clarence asked. "No idea. Does it matter? We're the law in this town, and it's our job to keep the peace. Doesn't matter if it's 10 or 10,000. We don't let hellions take the town." They both looked ready to refuse, but when Molly took up her gun and joined the sheriff by the door, that seemed to settle them. They weren't going to sit here and hide while the sheriff and a switchboard operator protected the whole damn town. The 4 of them set out, the streets eerily quiet before the storm, intent on holding them back, or dying in the process. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's video. If you still feel like you could do with a little more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that's appearing on your screen? If you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any of the stories we put on here. I make new videos 7 days a week, and I wouldn't want you to miss a one of them. So if you'd like to support the channel, why not go ahead and subscribe? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the great stuff we do here. And of course, if you'd like to support the channel in a more financial way, you could always become a member on YouTube or on Patreon. Spooky Skeletons, that's my $5 members, always get their videos early, as opposed to in the evening. And we've got lots of other cool stuff that you can take advantage of. Just go down to Patreon and give it a look, or become a member on YouTube. Speaking of all of our wonderful patrons and YouTube members, let's go ahead and thank them right now. Thanks to Unicorn Hollow, our Spooky Ghost contributor. Thanks to our Spooky Skeleton contributors, Janice, Lee Kendall, and Saikat. Thanks to our Ghostly Reader contributors, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, and Sarah SAMR42. Thanks, guys. We just couldn't do the show without you. Again, if you'd like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, there are links below to Patreon, and you can just go to YouTube and click on membership, if that's something that interests you. There's also links to my latest book below if you'd like to go have a look on Amazon. It should show you the other books I've got as well, so why not go ahead and get the whole collection. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.